Have you ever heard of a forest creature weeping in front of the Virgin Mary's statue? In a remote mountain town in Virginia, something unthinkable happened. A female Bigfoot stepped out at dawn, tears in her eyes, and with one sorrowful cry, led the entire village into the woods. What they found changed everything. The truth is, Bigfoot wasn't a monster, but a silent neighbor. She had returned lost baskets, stacked firewood for widows, and now she had just saved a man's life. Howard, a 72-year-old ranger, had collapsed deep in the forest. Bigfoot stayed with him all night, kept him warm, and in the morning, called for help the only way she knew how. She watched over him through snowstorms, swept the porch of the clinic, and sat like a grieving daughter outside his window. I've spent 6 years researching modern American folklore, and this story remains one of the most human I've ever uncovered. In the next few minutes, you'll learn why the town called her the Silent Watcher, how a mysterious bouquet of wildflowers appears every year outside the clinic, and what Howard whispered when he opened his eyes and saw her. If you've ever believed monsters can't have hearts, don't skip this story. The sun hadn't fully crested the ridgeline when the first breath of gold filtered through the lacework of oaks behind St. Agnes Church. Morning light always came late to Hawthorne's Gap. Like it, too, had to make peace with the hills. Frost still clung to the stonework of the village square, and steam rose faintly from the backs of 2 mule deer crossing near the tree line. The air smelled like chimney smoke, pine pitch, and distant earth just beginning to thaw. They came one by one, as they always did. Quiet footsteps on cracked flagstone, murmured greetings between flannel collars pulled high against the chill. Martha Ellery was the first to kneel, 78 years old and still rising earlier than most folks half her age. Her gloved hands folded neatly under her chin. Her wool shawl, thick dove gray, passed down from her mother, hung loose over her shoulders as she bowed before the white statue of the Virgin Mary at the center of the square. Behind her, others followed. Helen Griggs from the post office, Elmer Withers and his boy Nathan, the Barrett twins still in their sleeping scarves, the usual small crowd that had come to treat this patch of stone as something sacred, not just to God, but to memory. Birds hadn't yet started their song. It was that thin slice of morning when the world holds its breath, and that's when she appeared. The shift was so subtle at first that most didn't notice. A stillness fell over the square, deeper than silence. A current moved through the bodies like the electric hush before a thunderclap. Then someone, Helen, maybe, gasped. Across the square, at the mouth of Millbrook Path, half shadowed by the drooping arms of an eastern hemlock, a shape emerged. Not lumbering, not crashing, not like the tales told over beer and broken fence rails. She stepped forward, upright, slow, trembling, not with the menace of a beast, but the weight of something hurting. Her frame was gaunt, her fur matted and damp from dew, clinging in places like a threadbare coat. The morning light hit the left side of her face and revealed eyes that were wide, brownish amber, and glistening. Eyes that weren't wild, but worn. 2 strides carried her out of the tree's shadow and into full view. No one moved. Martha didn't blink. The creature stopped just shy of the first row of bricks in the square. There was no roar, no screech, no attempt to hide or flee. Instead, she stood taller, nearly 8 feet, though slightly hunched, and placed one hand, then the other, palm over palm, against her chest. And she looked, not at the people, at the statue, at Mary. And then something terrible and beautiful happened. She bowed her head, not in mimicry, not like a trained thing, but slowly, reverently. Her lips trembled, her jaw clenched. Her shoulders shook once, then again, as a soft, aching sound escaped her throat. Low, wet, almost like mourning. It wasn't a cry. It wasn't language. It was grief. Martha felt her knees weaken. The square held still like a painting come alive. Even the wind refused to move. The creature remained there for a long breath, maybe longer, then lifted her gaze to the townspeople, to the crowd now fully frozen in stunned silence. Her eyes swept over them, searching, pleading, holding. Then she turned her head slightly, just enough to break the spell, and took a step backward. Another? Then she looked over her shoulder toward the woods, and looked back again. It was not a threat. It was not a chase. It was an invitation. Her long arm stretched outward, gesturing once, not commanding, but calling. Then she turned fully and began to walk away, her limbs stiff, shoulders quivering with every step like they were holding in a scream. No one followed, not yet, but they all watched. Her back was hunched but dignified. Her walk was slow but driven. Her form shrank with distance but left something enormous behind. When the trees took her again, the sounds of the square returned. The rustle of coats, the murmurs of disbelief. A tin mug slipped from someone's hands and clattered against the stone, sharp and echoing. But Martha didn't turn. Her voice was steady when she finally spoke, barely above a whisper. But it carried. "Something's wrong." She rose, wobbled a bit, placed a hand on the shoulder of the boy beside her. "It didn't come to frighten," she said. "It came to ask." Someone stammered, "Ask what?" Martha's eyes were fixed on the place where the creature had disappeared. Her lips were pressed tight. Then she turned, straightened her back with effort, and started walking. Not away, but toward. "Come on," she said without looking back. If it meant harm, we'd already be harmed. No one argued. One by one, they fell in behind her. The town square that had stood unchanged for generations, where old men whittled and babies were baptized and grief was shared in casseroles and candlelight, had just become the first page of something new, something unspoken but already sacred. And at its center, a white statue stood tall beneath the slow-rising sun, the Virgin's gaze fixed toward the woods beyond, as if she, too, was waiting. The first few followed because of Martha. The rest followed because something in the air told them it would be wrong to turn away. The woods behind Millbrook Path weren't unfamiliar. That northern trail had been used for generations by townsfolk hauling kindling, tracking deer, or chasing down a loose goat. But that morning, nothing about it felt like it used to. The light was too still. The wind didn't hum. And even the birds, usually loud and unruly at dawn, kept quiet in the trees. The forest was listening, so they entered it with caution. Not because they feared danger, but because they understood something sacred had just opened its door. Martha led, her steps slow but unwavering. The frost clung to her skirt hem, but she didn't seem to notice. Her breathing was steady, her eyes fixed on the faint marks in the dirt ahead. Footfalls too large for any man, too long in stride, pressed deep into the soft morning loam. Others behind her exchanged glances, the kind that didn't need words. Some held hands. Nathan Barrett carried a small hunting knife he didn't mean to use, just something to ground him. Someone coughed once and was hushed. No one laughed. Even the children understood they were walking into a kind of hush that the world didn't make often. The path wound deeper under a canopy of sugar maple and poplar. Old trees leaned in like old men listening closely. Here and there, the early light filtered through the branches and landed in clean shafts across the path, and each time the creature ahead entered one, her form came into sudden, haunting clarity. She wasn't hurrying. Every so often she stopped and turned her head, just slightly, as if counting them. She seemed to wait for their courage to catch up. She didn't move like a wild thing. She moved like a sentinel with somewhere to be and people who needed to come with her. And they did. Through the briar patches, over the knotted roots, across old stumps still slick with dew. The silence stretched longer the deeper they went. Even the smell of the forest changed, less like pine, more like wet moss and cold bark. Breath began to fog. Shoulders hunched closer. Time bent inward, slowed. The line of villagers snaked quietly behind Martha, their boots pressing into earth softened by decades of rainfall and animal passing. The older ones started to whisper about where they were headed. The younger ones kept their mouths closed, their ears open. It was Nathan's father who said the words out loud. "I know this bend," he murmured. "There's a sugar maple with a split trunk up ahead. We're near the north slope. Nobody's lived back here since the Henderson shack burned down in '61. Martha didn't reply. She just kept walking. Her heart was beating louder than the crunch beneath her shoes. She could feel it in her ribs, a kind of heavy knock that didn't belong to fear, but to some memory not yet formed. When the creature stopped again, this time near a wide, moss-covered stone, everyone stopped too. The air thickened. A shape lay just beyond it, slumped, still. There, beneath the twisted roots of a massive red maple, was a man. His coat was askew, one boot gone, his shirt half unbuttoned, exposing a patch of pale skin that looked nearly blue in the cold. It was Howard. He was lying on his side, lips parted, his face pulled tight in a grimace. The air near him smelled faintly of damp wool and pine tar. His chest rose and fell, but shallow, uncertain. His breath was a dry rattle, a tremor. Then stillness, gasps broke the silence. Someone cried out, but Martha moved first. She dropped beside him without hesitation, pressed her hand to his forehead. Cold, still damp from the night. His pulse, when she found it, was weak, a thread pulled thin. The creature didn't move away. It stood on the other side of him, just a few feet from Martha. Its arms hung low, fingers twitching as if fighting some inner tremor. Then it did something no one expected. It knelt, gently, carefully, and it leaned in. It sniffed near Howard's ear. Then it placed one hand flat beside his ribs, not touching him, but close enough to feel if something inside was still trying to hold on. Its face turned upward, toward the people, toward Martha, toward all of them, and it held the gaze. Not blinking, not pleading, not threatening. Hand still beside him. It looked at them like a mother might look across a nursery room and beg the nurse to save the child she can't reach. Martha didn't speak. She didn't need to. Someone behind her turned to run back to the village for help. Another whispered Ruth's name, the doctor's name, as if it might summon her from thin air. But the creature remained still, hunched beside Howard like a guard that had never left post. And Martha realized something. It hadn't just found him. It had been there. Maybe all night. Maybe since the moment Howard fell. Had it carried him here? Had it stayed when the night got colder, when the wind picked up, when the forest howled? Had it kept predators away? Had it watched his chest rise and fall and feared the moment it stopped? She didn't know, but she believed it. And that belief was heavy. Howard's breath sputtered. His lips twitched. One eye fluttered. Not awake, but not gone. The others stood frozen, caught between awe and uncertainty. Some still couldn't look directly at the creature. Others stared so hard their eyes burned. And all the while, the forest around them remained hushed. The trees leaned in closer. The sun, now higher, filtered through the thinning canopy and hit the top of the creature's back. Its fur gleamed faintly. Its shoulders rose and fell in sync with Howard's fragile breath. When the bird calls finally returned, they did so cautiously. A single note from a Carolina wren, then another. The moment cracked just enough for someone to whisper, "We need to get him out." It was a statement, not a question. No one argued. A few stepped forward, carefully. No sudden moves. They knelt near Martha, began checking Howard's limbs, his eyes. He was alive, and it was the creature that had kept him that way. When they lifted him, the body sagged between two men. Martha supported his head. The creature stood as they did, slowly, every inch of it shaking with exhaustion, or restraint, or something deeper. It didn't reach for him. It didn't follow. But it turned its head as they began to carry him away, as if memorizing how his body looked when lifted by hands that knew him. Then it followed, not in step, not intruding, just behind, close enough to protect, far enough to trust. And with every footfall, something shifted in the minds of those watching. Every story told over firelight, every warning passed down, every old hunter's tale of beasts in the brush. They all started to feel smaller, and something else, quieter, sadder, more complicated, took root in their place. Because what they had seen wasn't a monster, it was a being, and it had waited. Now it walked among them, no longer hidden, and not a soul dared to ask it to turn back. Not yet, maybe not ever, and still the forest held its breath, waiting. Just like them. They carried him the way you'd carry a man who might not come back. Careful, reverent, not speaking unless necessary. The path winding out of the woods seemed longer than it had coming in, though no one said it. Martha stayed near his head, her hand brushing the side of his arm every so often just to be sure he was still warm. The creature followed without sound, never brushing too close, never veering too far. It kept its distance, but not its attention. Every shift of Howard's weight, every low groan when the trail dipped, it reacted. Eyes tightening, shoulders tensing, as if ready to intervene. Not one soul told it to stop. They just walked. Together. The moment they crossed the stone boundary that marked the edge of the forest, someone ran ahead. Word would reach the village before they did. Ruth McAllister's porch light would already be flicked on by the time they rounded the bend. But even before that happened, even before a single door creaked open or curtains shifted, the air had changed. There was something in the way the others stepped aside, giving the creature a clear view of Howard's body. Something in the way their silence turned from caution into acknowledgement. No one said thank you, not yet, but they didn't need to. As they reached the first wooden fence behind the old peach grove, an older man near the rear, Samuel Greer, a mason whose hands always smelled of river mud and tobacco, cleared his throat and spoke low. Not for attention, just for whoever happened to be near. "He didn't shoot," he said. "I remember." A woman glanced over. "Who?" "Howard," he replied, eyes still forward. "Few years back, maybe 10, no, longer." He rubbed his knuckles, brow wrinkled like he was feeling for the memory in his bones. "Up by Cedar Run." He was tracking coyote prints but found something else. I remember he came into the store after, pale as milk. Wouldn't say what he saw, not right out. But I remember what he did. The woman leaned in slightly, her pace matching his. He put his rifle up for sale the next morning, said it wasn't for him anymore. Others started to listen without meaning to. Steps slowed. The sound of boots on packed dirt softened. Few of us asked. Tried to joke. I said maybe he saw a ghost, or one of them hairy hill people from the old miner stories. He didn't laugh, didn't deny it either. Just said, whatever I saw, it saw me first, and it didn't run, and I won't be the man who shoots something that watches me like that. The woman swallowed hard. The wind passed through the trees above them, shaking loose a few early leaves. Another voice, quieter. "Wasn't there a story about a jacket?" Martha didn't turn, but her chin lifted slightly. "Yes," she said. "Winter of '83. He went up alone, checking the water lines maybe. Didn't come back till well after dark. Said he got turned around, nearly froze. Next day, I saw him folding up his coat, the green wool one, walked out into the yard and hung it on the fence rail like it was waiting for someone." Someone else murmured, "I remember that." "He left it out there overnight," Martha said, voice steadier now. "Next morning, it was folded, right on his porch. Snow dusted over the top like it hadn't even been touched. But it had. It was cleaner, like someone had brushed the mud off." A pause opened like a breath no one wanted to exhale. "That was the only time I ever saw him cry," Martha said, almost to herself. "Not loud, not long, but he did." They were nearly at the village now. The wooden fences gave way to gravel paths. The scent of wood smoke drifted stronger. Lamps flickered on in windows. But the forest still clung to them. The hush hadn't lifted. The creature was still there, behind them, quiet, immense, tracking every movement of the man they carried as if bound by something deeper than duty. When the roof of the clinic came into view, just beyond the red maple that leaned too far over the path. A few folks started to run ahead, calling Ruth's name, but the rest stayed in rhythm. Still no one asked the creature to go. Still no one tried to explain what it was doing, because somehow they already knew. They laid Howard on the porch gently, not needing instruction. Ruth was already pulling on gloves. The lanterns in the windows lit her figure from behind, casting her in yellow, her outline sharp. But even she paused a beat when she caught sight of the figure standing near the fence. Her jaw tightened. Her hands didn't shake, but her eyes widened. She didn't say a word to it. She only stepped inside, gestured for them to bring Howard in, and left the door open behind her. And through that open door, the creature did not step. It stayed outside and waited. Not long after, someone brought a blanket. Not for it, but for Martha. She shook her head and draped it across the porch rail instead. There was a moment when they all looked at each other. Villagers, children, farmers, the postmaster's wife, a boy still holding the knife he never used, and realized they didn't feel afraid anymore. Not quite. It wasn't gone. Fear never left all at once. But it had changed shape, and in its place, something older had started to bloom. Not belief, not yet, but recognition. The creature didn't pace. It didn't growl. It didn't try to come inside. It stood still, hands hanging loosely at its sides, one foot slightly back as if caught between staying and leaving. And when Martha turned to look at it again, something shifted. The past wasn't just old tales now. It was real. It was standing there, and they'd all seen it. Every one of them. The silence returned, not heavy, but full, and beneath the porch light's hum, there was the faintest sound, a low, steady breath from inside the clinic. Howard, still breathing, still here, and no one noticed that the creature's fingers, barely, just barely, brushed the edge of the porch railing before letting go and stepping back into the night. Not away, just enough to wait. The lights inside the little wooden clinic glowed like quiet lanterns against the fogged-up windows, soft and breathing. Ruth McAllister moved with purpose, her sleeves rolled to the elbows, her voice calm and low as she checked Howard's vitals. Her hands didn't shake. She'd treated worse, seen worse, but there was something in the air tonight, something hanging between silence and belief, that made every second feel like the weight of a year. The village clinic had seen births and deaths, stitches and broken bones, but never this. Never a presence waiting beyond the glass, too still to be a man, too gentle to be a threat. Outside the window, the creature stood unmoving. Not hidden, not crouched. It just stood there, facing the house like someone waiting for news they had no right to ask for. Its silhouette loomed across the cedar-planked floor through the thin muslin curtains. The oil lamp flickered once. Its glow caught the edge of its brow, the soft curve of its shoulder. The shadow stretched long across the wall, like it belonged there, like it always had. Ruth didn't speak about it. Not yet. She focused on the man. The old ranger who lay unconscious, his breathing shallow but present. A faint twitch in one hand betraying the tug of life that refused to give up just yet. The room smelled of antiseptic and old wood and something else beneath it. Muddy pine, cool moss, whatever it was that had clung to him when they carried him in. Martha sat quietly in the corner, her shawl wrapped tight, eyes fixed on the floor but not unseeing. She was thinking, same as the others. Thinking hard. Not just about Howard. About what was happening to all of them. What it meant. Every now and then her gaze lifted toward the window, and she didn't flinch when the creature's shape moved slightly. If anything, she leaned in. Out on the porch, a few men shifted nervously. Elmer Withers, still clutching his cap, whispered something to the Barrett twins. They nodded, but didn't move. One of them had brought a rifle earlier, now resting uselessly by the steps. It hadn't been loaded. Just a reflex, the kind of thing you grab when you don't know what else to do. No one was touching it now. Inside, the only sounds were the steady scrape of Ruth's chair, the soft clinking of glass as she prepared a syringe, and the rhythmic tick of the wall clock above the mantel. Time felt slower in that room, like the whole world had decided to pause with them. Even the wind outside had dulled to a hush. Then came the noise. Small, just the creak of the front step. The creature had moved closer. Just a half step, maybe not even that. But it was enough to make every person near the window stop breathing. One of the Barrett boys took a sharp inhale. Ruth didn't look up. It didn't come to the door. It didn't try to push closer. It simply placed one massive hand against the frame, flat, fingers spread, like it was holding the house upright. Ruth glanced at Howard then, as if responding to something felt but not heard. She leaned close, pressed her fingers against his neck, her ear to his chest. The heartbeat was there, faint but growing steadier. And then she noticed it. On his shirt, near the buttons, just below the collarbone, a smear. Not blood, mud. No, thicker, darker. She reached for a cloth, gently dabbed away the dried edge of it, and saw the shape underneath. 5 fingers, enormous, smeared into the fabric like a blessing pressed through the earth. A handprint. She didn't speak for a long time. Just stared. Then she folded the cloth and stood. Her voice was low when she finally broke the silence. "He's not alone in this." Martha met her eyes. Ruth didn't need to explain. "Do we let it in?" Someone whispered from the porch. "No," Ruth said simply. "It's not asking to come in, it's waiting." For what? No one said. But the question hung there, ripe and breathing. The creature didn't shift again. It stayed rooted to the spot, as if stepping inside would be too much. Like it knew the line between worlds was thinner than ever now, and crossing it might tear something important. Someone brought a stool out to the porch. Martha, still silent, took it. She set it down beside the wall near the window, not quite facing the creature, but not turning from it either. She sat. The creature didn't react. It stayed exactly where it was. Minutes passed, then an hour, then another. People came and went. Some brought coffee. Others just stood in the yard and stared, not with fear anymore, but with a kind of quiet reverence. The children didn't cry. They watched from doorways, from behind legs, from the arms of their mothers, watching the thing that had once lived only in campfire stories. Now it stood in the lantern light, silent as a grave marker, and somehow just as holy. Someone tried to bring food. A slice of cornbread, a piece of smoked trout wrapped in paper. They set it down near the porch rail, but the creature didn't look at it, didn't sniff, didn't move. It had not come for food. That much was clear. The snow came late that night, first as a whisper, then as a sigh. It brushed the eaves of the porch, softened the edges of the wooden steps, crept in around the corners of the clinic windows. Ruth had stoked the stove twice. Howard slept on, his color better, his breathing more sure. Outside, the creature remained, and when the snow began to gather on the porch steps, it did something almost too simple to notice. It leaned forward and brushed the snow away with the side of its hand. Then it sat, not to rest, not to sleep, just to stay, its eyes fixed on the warm glow behind the window, not pressing, not demanding, just there. One of the Barrett boys came out again, wrapped in his father's old hunting coat. He looked at the creature, then back at Martha. She said nothing. The boy nodded, then walked over and sat on the other side of the porch, a few feet from the creature. A few minutes later, someone else did the same. By morning, there were 6. No one said a word. No one needed to. They didn't look at it, not directly. They just sat in the same silence it had given them, mirroring its patience. It was no longer an outsider. Not entirely. It was no longer myth. It was no longer just story. It was part of something now. And somewhere inside that little wooden clinic, Howard Whitlock's heart kept beating. And the people of Hawthorne's Gap, for reasons none of them could quite explain yet, had chosen not to look away. The clock inside the clinic ticked past 3 when Ruth leaned back from the cot and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her knuckles ached. Her palms were raw, But Howard was breathing. Slower now, steadier. The color had returned to his lips. His chest rose like a tide that knew its rhythm again. She reached for a fresh cloth, wiped the sweat from his temple, then pressed her hand flat against his heart. It was there, faint but firm. She whispered something under her breath. Not a prayer, not really, but close enough to feel like one. Outside, the storm hadn't come, but the snow kept falling. Thin, soft, almost ashamed of itself. The porch had gone still. The small crowd of watchers had trickled down to just 2 men and Martha, who refused to move. She sat like part of the wood now, shawl wrapped, eyes fixed on the dim shape crouched just past the porch rail. It hadn't left. It hadn't even flinched when the lanterns inside began to flicker from low oil. It just stayed, waiting, watching. Then it rose, not in alarm, not to leave, just a slow unfurling of limbs, towering but quiet. It stepped closer to the window now, hands open at its sides. The porch creaked once under the shift in weight. Inside the clinic, the lamp flame jumped. Howard stirred. Ruth froze. She leaned in. He blinked, once, twice. His lips parted. A sound came out. Not quite a word, more like the bare edge of one. Ruth leaned closer. Then he said it. "You stayed." His voice was a rasp, nearly lost in the hum of the wind outside. But she heard it, clear as church bells. "You stayed with me." Outside, the creature didn't move. But the breath from its nose fogged the glass now. One hand slowly lifted. Not to touch, not to demand. It simply rested against the window, like it was offering its weight, its truth. Ruth stepped back, her hand still on Howard's shoulder. She turned toward the window and saw it clearly now. That massive frame, backlit by snowlight. That face, exhausted, ancient, aching. The hand pressed against the glass, wide enough to span a man's chest, fingers darkened with dirt and something else. She squinted. Mud, dried, smudged across the fingers. Her eyes dropped to Howard's shirt again. That handprint, that same spread, that same curve. It hadn't just stayed with him. It had touched him, held him, pressed its hand to his heart and waited. Then came a sound no one expected. The porch boards groaned again. Not from movement, from weight being released. The creature was stepping back, slowly, almost reluctantly, as if to say, "This part is done." But then something stopped it. Howard shifted again. This time his hand moved, weakly but with intent. He lifted it a few inches off the blanket and opened his fingers, palm up, toward the window. His voice was even fainter now. "Don't go!" Ruth's chest tightened. Martha turned her head just enough to catch it. The creature didn't answer, but it stepped forward again. One step, maybe 2, close enough that its shadow swallowed the window's edge. It crouched, its eyes level with the cot now. Howard's fingers trembled, reaching toward the glass. They didn't touch. There was still too much between them, but the space closed, and that was enough. The clinic went silent again, heavy and full. Ruth stepped back toward the table, her hands shaking now. Not from fear, from something older, something closer to awe. The kind that doesn't come from seeing something impossible. The kind that comes from realizing it's been here all along, and you're only just seeing it right. Then she saw it. Something on Howard's chest, where his shirt was damp. A smear, just barely visible. She stepped closer. Not blood, not mud. Beneath the cotton fabric, something had been pressed in. A shape, a memory. The mark of a palm, dried into the cloth, but deeper than that, as if it had passed through the fabric and pressed into the skin beneath. 5 fingers, large, protective, not a warning, a promise. And then Ruth understood. It hadn't just stayed with him. It had kept him breathing. Not with medicine, not with force, but by willing it, by being there. Martha stood now. She walked slowly to the edge of the porch. The snow crackled underfoot. The creature didn't react. She stopped about a yard away and stared up into those dark, unreadable eyes. She didn't speak, not at first. Then she did. "Thank you." Her voice barely rose above the wind, but the words landed solid. "You didn't have to, but you did." The creature blinked. Its eyes dropped. Just for a second, like it was ashamed to have been seen. And then it turned its head toward the woods. Its body shifted. It looked back at the window one last time, at the man in the bed, at the trembling hand, at the faces now gathered behind the glass. And slowly, achingly, it turned. Its shoulders curled inward. Its steps were slow, heavy. Snow fell off its back in loose clumps. No one followed. They watched and listened. As its footfalls faded into the night, Howard's fingers curled shut on the blanket. Ruth brushed his hair back from his forehead. His breathing had steadied now. A little stronger, a little fuller. The creature was gone. But the imprint remained, not just in the shirt or the dirt, but in the room, in the people, in the stories that would never again be told with mockery or doubt. A creature had knelt by a dying man, kept his heart beating with nothing but presence. And then, when it was sure he would live, it left. No roar, no vanishing act, just the quiet dignity of something ancient choosing to step back. And even long after it was gone, the clinic still felt full. Not haunted, not watched, just held, like the air was thicker with memory now. And the silence wasn't empty, it was sacred. By morning, the snow had crusted over the porch like sugar. It crunched under the heels of boots and the shuffle of wool slippers as the townsfolk took turns visiting the little clinic. Ruth kept the lights dim, the stove warm, and the windows cracked just enough to let the air circulate without biting. Howard lay on the cot near the center wall, propped up slightly, wrapped in 3 layers of quilts, a soft breath in, a softer one out. His eyes opened more often now. He didn't talk much, but he was there, awake, present. That was enough. Word had spread without anyone meaning it to. Not loud, not gossiped, just passed hand to hand like a secret you didn't dare keep to yourself. So by noon, a quiet procession had begun. No one rang the bell or knocked. They just showed up, some with jars of soup, some with folded blankets, others with nothing but silence and a glance toward the porch. And there it still sat. The creature hadn't moved far. It hadn't returned to the woods or vanished with the night. It was simply there, at the edge of the porch just beyond the last step. Snow dusted across its shoulders. Its back leaned against the support post like it had grown out of the timber. Its knees were pulled close. Hands rested open on either side, and its eyes, those dark, bottomless eyes, never left the door. It didn't eat the food, never touched the bread someone left near the rail, didn't glance at the cup of broth Elmer Withers gently set down 2 feet away. It wasn't hunger that kept it there. Everyone understood that now. It was something else, something older, something that didn't speak but still said, "I'll wait." And wait it did. Through the morning frost, through the whisper of sleet that came just before noon, through the long gray stretch of cloud that hovered low like the sky was holding its breath. It didn't flinch, didn't hide. Inside, Ruth checked Howard's pulse again. She didn't bother hiding the tremble in her hands this time. Martha noticed, but didn't say a word. She just pulled the curtain back a few inches and looked out again, at the shape that hadn't changed. Then she reached for a blanket of her own, draped it over her shoulders, and stepped out onto the porch. The wind had shifted, not biting but cold enough to sting. She sat down slowly on the top step. The creature didn't move. It had grown used to her presence now, trusted her maybe. She spoke without turning. "You've been out here a long while." The creature's chest moved once. A slow breath. "You waiting for him to come out? Or just making sure he stays in?" No answer. Of course not. She pulled her shawl tighter. Her voice was gentle, not pressing. "You did a good thing, whether you meant to or not." Snow clung to her boots. She rubbed her palms together, then glanced sideways. "You're not going to come inside, are you?" A faint shift of muscle, maybe recognition, maybe not. "You don't have to. We see you. We do, even if we don't say it." And then she fell silent again. Just the two of them, and the cold. Later that night, someone brought out an old rocking chair and set it near the post. Didn't say a word. Just placed it there, gave a nod, and left. The creature didn't sit, but it didn't move away either. That was the rhythm of those days. Howard healing slow and steady. The town adjusting, quietly, awkwardly, but without panic. And the creature remaining. Every day, a few more people dared to sit on the porch. Not to talk, just to sit. Some stayed 5 minutes. Others stayed until dusk. They brought coffee in tin mugs, left space between them and the railing. Over time, that space felt less like a wall and more like a path. A boy brought a sketch pad, drew what he saw, then gave the drawing to the creature, left it by the step. The creature looked at it, didn't take it, but it stayed. The nights were the hardest. Cold settled in like regret. The wind dragged through the eaves, rattled the shutters. Yet even then, it never left the porch, never moved back into the trees. More than once, Ruth woke in the middle of the night, lit the lamp, and looked outside. And every time, without fail, it was there. Curled against the beam, head tucked low, eyes half closed but never unaware. Watching, guarding, keeping something alive just by staying close. She began to think of it less as a creature and more like a memory that refused to fade. A reminder of what? She wasn't sure, but it felt necessary. It felt earned. And slowly, the town began to shift. The porch became something sacred, no longer just the front of a clinic. It became a place of watching, of waiting, of presence. No one tried to move the creature. No one suggested calling someone. No one mocked or whispered anymore. Instead, they watched with it. And when snow fell, someone always came out to sweep the steps clear before it could. When wind picked up, someone brought out another blanket, just in case. It never took the offerings, but it never turned them away. One night near the end of the week, Howard stirred again. Eyes clearer now, breath stronger. Ruth sat beside him, her voice soft. "She's still out there." He blinked. "Still?" She nodded. He closed his eyes. A pause. Then he whispered, "Good." She touched his wrist. "You remember?" A slow nod. "I wasn't alone." "No," she said, "you weren't." He smiled then, just a little, and through the glass the creature lifted its head, just a little, as if it heard, or felt. And the snow kept falling, and the porch stayed lit, and the silence between species felt not like a barrier, but a bridge made of breath and waiting. And there, in the stillness, something older than words took root, and it stayed. It was a Thursday morning when Howard stood again. Pale light spilled in through the frost-bitten window panes, catching the silver in his beard and the bruises still fading across his arms. The quilt slid from his shoulders as he sat up, then rose slow like an old pine shifting against the wind. Ruth steadied him as he dressed, layer by layer, breath by breath. He didn't say much, just nodded when she asked if he felt ready, and blinked longer when the sunlight hit his face through the open door. Outside, the porch was empty. The chair near the beam still had snow around its legs, undisturbed. No tracks, no prints. Just the memory of weight that had been there. By the time Howard stepped out onto the porch, a few neighbors had already gathered. Not in a crowd. Just enough to say they wanted to be part of whatever this was. Martha stood near the edge, her eyes sharp but wet. Shawl pulled tight around her ribs like she was holding her breath with her whole body. Across the street, someone lowered their window curtain halfway. Not spying, just witnessing. Howard wore his old ranger coat, the one with the tear in the left elbow. He hadn't worn it in years, not since the day he left that jacket on the rail and it came back folded. That morning, the collar sat loose around his neck, and the sleeves hung longer than he remembered. but it still smelled faintly of pine and creek water and something older than either. Martha stepped to his side. "You sure you can walk that far?" Howard gave her a look. It wasn't defiance, just certainty and grief and gratitude. He stepped off the porch. He didn't need help down the steps. They followed him, quiet as snowfall. They crossed the muddy square, boots crunching through half-melted slush, past the statue of the Virgin Mary standing sentinel in the center. The same one the creature had stood before that morning. The memory of it still clung to the air around the base. There were no flowers there, no offerings. But something in the stillness of that space made people lower their heads slightly as they passed. Howard paused for a breath beside the statue, then looked up and saw it at the edge of the woods, half hidden behind a veil of frost-covered cedar. The creature stood still, arms at its sides, head low. It didn't move as Howard stepped closer. The others behind him slowed, stopped. This wasn't theirs anymore. This moment belonged to just the two of them. Howard walked slow, steady, every step sinking slightly in the mud. When he reached the tree line, he stopped. They looked at each other, not for the first time. Not really. But this time, face to face, daylight soft but honest. There was no mistaking the eyes. They held nothing wild, nothing hunted, only memory and understanding, and maybe a kind of sorrow. Howard nodded. It wasn't a big nod. Just the kind a man gives when words aren't big enough. The creature lifted its chin, just slightly. Its breath steamed out in ribbons. Its shoulders relaxed. One foot shifted, and then it turned. Not in fear, not to flee, but with something heavier, something final. Each step into the trees sounded softer than the last. The branches closed behind it like curtains, one by one, until nothing was left but stillness. Howard didn't chase. He just stood there, the snow ticking down like ash on his coat sleeve. Then it hit him, not a sound, not a smell, something inside. Tight, rising. He turned away from the woods, took one step, then another, stopped, and broke. He didn't fall, didn't scream, but his shoulders shook, his chest hitched, and tears rolled down his face. Not sharp, not sudden, just the kind that had been waiting too long. Martha reached him first. She didn't say a word, just wrapped her arm around his back and let him cry. And there, at the edge of the square, in the middle of that small town in the Blue Ridge Mountains, an old ranger finally let go of something he'd carried for too many winters. Not pain, but silence. The kind of silence that stays after loss, after the forest has gone still, after a goodbye that never got said. And this time, he got to say it, not in words, but in being seen, and in letting himself see back. And somewhere deeper in the woods, where snow still clung to low branches, and the cold seeped through roots and rock, something tall and fur-covered moved quieter than breath, and left no trail behind it. But the sound of that nod, of that human saying thank you without saying it, carried far beyond the trees, and stayed. They don't tell the story all at once. Not around here. Not like a tale passed down at the dinner table, or something carved into stone. It comes out slowly, like fog rolling in from the hills, quiet, steady, and full of things half glimpsed and half felt. But the people of Hawthorne's Gap remember. They remember the winter when time softened, when silence spoke louder than sirens, when something ancient knelt beside a dying man and waited without asking for a single thing in return. No one called the papers. No one sent for experts or scientists. And if anyone ever tried to write it down, they either tore it up before finishing or folded it carefully and tucked it between Bible pages no one else was allowed to open. The statue in the square still stands. Same white stone, same cracks running down the robe from the freeze years ago. But now, when the morning light hits just right, especially in February, especially around the time Howard stood again, there's a warmth in the air that doesn't come from the sun. They say it's something else. They say that's when the story breathes. Kids ask, sometimes. They'll point at the woods and ask their mothers if the giant is real. The older ones, the ones who were small when it happened, will just shrug and smile without saying yes or no. The real answer lives in the pauses between sentences, in the way people step softer when they walk past the clinic porch, in how no one ever cut down the cedar at the tree line, even when it started leaning too close to the road. Howard doesn't talk about it much anymore. Not because he can't, but because he doesn't need to. Every February, he puts on his old ranger coat, the same one, even older now, and walks to the square without anyone reminding him. Martha walks with him. So does Ruth, if the weather holds. He sits on the bench near the statue. Same spot, same time. And, without fail, every year, there's a bunch of wildflowers on the front step of the clinic. No note, no footprints, just damp stems bundled in a way too precise for accident. Sometimes they're wrapped in birch bark. Sometimes it's just the stems, fresh, vivid, wild. But always there, always on time. The kids used to think it was Martha, or Elmer, or the Barrett twins playing a trick, but no one ever saw anyone drop them off. Not once. And one time, when a boy tried to wait all night in the bushes to catch who did it, he woke up the next morning with his coat folded over him, his flashlight tucked neatly into the crook of his elbow, and no memory of falling asleep. He never tried again. Over time, people started treating that day like a quiet holiday. No name for it, no speeches, but folks bring food to the clinic. They clean the steps without asking. Some drop off letters they never expect answers to. Others just come to sit. One year, a woman from out of town got lost in the hills near dusk. She wasn't from here, didn't know the stories. Slipped on ice, sprained her ankle near the North Ridge, and swore she saw something moving near her before she blacked out. When the search party found her the next morning, she was wrapped in someone's old flannel jacket and curled beside a stump like she'd been carried there. The jacket wasn't anyone's from town, and it smelled faintly of cedar and earth. People don't ask anymore, they just leave space. And every so often, if you walk the trails behind the old quarry road after the snow melts, you might catch a glimpse. Just a shape, tall and still, between the trunks. Not running, not hiding, just watching, keeping time. Some say it's still looking after Howard. Others say it never left the edge of the square, that it waits near the old sugar maple tree until winter breaks, then walks the old paths just to make sure no one's lost their way. But no one chases it. No one calls it down, because they understand now. It never wanted to be found. It only wanted to stay close enough. And when spring rolls around, when the frost starts to lift from the roots and the porch creaks in the first warmth of the season, you can hear the boards settle like they remember too. Not loud, not obvious, just enough to remind you. Some things don't need proof. Some things just need patience. A hand resting on a window frame, a breath shared between worlds, a heartbeat that kept going because something stayed beside it long enough to say, "Don't stop yet." And when people tell the story, if they do, they never use its name, because names make things smaller. And what stood on that porch, night after night, in silence and snow and waiting, was never small. It was something bigger than a myth, bigger than the woods. It was mercy that had learned how to walk. In the end, what lasts is simpler than we think. Not the thunder of answers, but the soft courage of staying. The world doesn't always heal because someone arrives with the perfect words. It heals because someone refuses to look away, because a light is left on, because a hand rests on the frame of a door and says, without speaking, "I'm here." We forget how much that matters until a quiet presence steadies our breath and teaches our fear a slower rhythm. There are places where the map of the heart overlaps the map of the land. A porch at dusk, a square at dawn, a narrow path into trees that listen. In those places, the border between us and other thins just enough to let mercy cross. Not the loud kind, the ordinary kind, the sweeping of a step, the waiting through the night, the patience to trust that life can come back if someone keeps watch long enough. Maybe the oldest wisdom is not how to fight, but how to remain. To guard without gripping, to care without claiming, to let what is wounded take its time without demanding a debt in return. Presence, after all, is a kind of prayer anyone can make. It doesn't need a name. It doesn't ask for proof. It simply leans close to a fragile rhythm and keeps time until it grows strong again. We like to believe miracles are rare, but perhaps we walk past them. A door that opens, a bench shared with a stranger, a breath that steadies between two worlds because attention holds it gently in place. The sacred isn't always distant. Sometimes it is just the shape of patience taking on a body for a while, so that another life can find its way home. Let this be the lesson we carry forward. That kindness is a form of intelligence, and quiet respect is a form of strength. That reverence can live in the smallest gestures. That our best stories don't conquer the dark. They accompany someone through it. And when we step back, when we give the moment back to silence, it isn't absence, it's honor. So tonight, leave a chair by the door. Sweep the threshold even if no one is coming. Look toward the line of trees or the line of roofs, and remember that somewhere, someone is waiting for a sign that the world still has room for them. Be that sign. Keep the long watch, not because you must, but because you can. Because once, someone did it for you. Maybe a person, maybe a stranger, maybe something older than both. And your breath is part of theirs now. If this story touched a tender place in you, let it keep moving. Tell someone gently that you see them. Sit a while where the air feels thin and listen for what the day forgot to say. We are, each of us, the keepers of one another's breath. When we stay, the distance between lives shortens. When we honor what we don't fully understand, the world grows large enough for all its quiet wonders. Thank you for spending this time here. If a line, an image, or a feeling stayed with you, I'd love to hear it. Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like more midnight stories told with care, please follow and subscribe to the channel. Your presence matters. It keeps the porch light on for the next traveler.